When I woke up, it was one of the most terrifying, crazy moments of my life. I remember it was dark. I was laying on my side. I could only see like faint stuff. I was so thirsty, I could hardly open my mouth, and I was begging for water. I think they probably with Dilaudid, which is an opioid, knocked me out, right back out. When I woke up the second time, I felt wonderful. I mean, obviously I felt like, I could tell something had happened, but I wasn't experiencing pain. I looked down at my belly and all I could see was all these tubes coming out of me. And I could see the staples. There's 30 something of them all across. I would show you this, a little bit graphic, but I remember seeing all the tubes, and there was 4 of them, and they had bags on them, and they were my bile, and I couldn't hardly move. I had IVs all over the place, machines and people all around me. Immediately, I felt so great. I could see the world again. I hadn't seen anything remotely in focus in 10 years. I could think clearly. Okay, everybody, welcome back to your channel, to the channel. I'm Steve Patterson. We're going to do 2 lives today. My brother Troy is going to be along later for us to do another one of our Gen X transplant brothers, I guess you could call them, but I realized that I have not followed up on an individual video that I did talking about my transplant saga. I did the part 1, which you'll see linked probably right about here, about now. And that led up to, well, that was from the time that I started feeling ill to being diagnosed and then receiving the prognosis, leading up to the time of transplant itself. And so without going through all of that, we're going to start today basically on the morning of, I guess it would have been January 4th or 3rd. I got my transplant on the 3rd. I don't know if I woke up on the 3rd in the evening or whatever, but it was overnight on that day. But to set the stage briefly, it all began real fast. I'm just going to tell you, listen, I'll do it all began. Let's just go like this. Heading into that day on say the 2nd of January, my condition was like this. I, at that point, was just about 9 years into this whole saga, after first being diagnosed with stage 4 liver failure in 2010. And then that led quickly to discovering that I had ulcers and things like that going on, but nothing was really done about it in that immediate time. Once I received the prognosis that I had between 6 months and 3 years to live, I checked out. I checked out of my career that I had. I was in a position where I could do that because I've been working remotely, and I still am. This is my 28th year being a remote worker, self-employed. And so I had the ability to stay home and sort of check out and let staff members run the website that I was running at the time, ugasports.com, which at the time was part of the rivals.com network. Today, it's part of the On3 network. I had started UGA Sports back in 97. And so I had terminal liver failure. And then also along the way, I also picked up, they found out that I had cancerous tumors in my liver. They also discovered I had hepatitis C, which was probably one of the principal causes of this because it was later determined that I'd probably had that since the 80s. And so I had at that time stage 4 liver failure, stage 4 liver cancer. I had the 2 tumors. I had, of course, other things such as high blood pressure. I had already had by this time, the ulcers were removed. But so anyway, that's where I was. And so I woke up on the morning. Well, the first time I woke up, let's just start like this. Okay. And for transplant recipient potential people out there, this might sound hard. Okay. When I woke up, it was one of the most terrifying, crazy moments of my life. I remember it was dark. I was laying on my side. I could only see like faint stuff. I knew I was in the hospital. I was screaming for water. I was so thirsty, I could hardly open my mouth, and they would not let me have any water. And I was begging for water. It was very hard. And this only lasted maybe a couple minutes. I think they probably with Dilaudid, which is an opioid, knocked me out, right back out. Because when I came back, I don't know how many hours later it would have been. It was the next morning. This time I see my mother sitting there, and there's a photo of me just prior to this, which I'll see if I can throw up right about now in the video, if I'm that cool later in the replay when people I'll cut this into probably a segment to put up as an individual video. But when I woke up the second time, I felt wonderful. I mean, obviously I felt like, I could tell something had happened, but I wasn't experiencing pain. I looked down at my belly, and all I could see was all these tubes coming out of me, and I could see the staples. There was 30 something of them all across. I would show you this, a little bit graphic. I could show you the scar. But I remember seeing all the tubes, and there was 4 of them, and they had bags on them, and they were my bile, and they were these other things, and I couldn't hardly move. I had IVs all over the place, of course, machines and people all around me. Immediately, I felt so great. I could see the world again. I could see clarity. I hadn't seen anything remotely in focus in 10 years, almost 9 years. I could think clearly. I didn't have that feeling of hepatic encephalopathy, which I didn't mention was a major drag during this whole time. I had it really bad, particularly the first 5 years. And so I was cognitively way out there in those years. And that was all gone. It was instantly gone. It was like, wow, I didn't realize how out there everything had been as far as even the way the world looked and the lights and the colors and things like that. It was great to see that. And so, I was just so full of gratitude and just I did it. I had been saying all those years, there's no way I was going to die, and it actually happened. And so I immediately was so positive about it. And I mentioned in one of the Gen X transplant clips, because my brother he's also since had a liver transplant, and it didn't go the same way with him. But I mentioned that I tried to escape. I didn't mean literally tried to escape. I tried to get out of the bed. I wanted to get up and walk around. Like, probably the end of the beginning of the second, it wasn't long after the first time I woke up. I actually just put my legs over the side and started to try to stand up. And it was because of the bags that they had. That was an issue. I couldn't walk around the bags. So it wasn't until I think maybe the third day or so when the bags came out. And then I got up and I was walking all around the place. As fast as they would let me go. And of course, we're not talking very fast. We're talking, somebody on the other side. There's some pictures of that. Perhaps I'll flow those. But also, there's very few photos I have of this entire era. And oddly enough, the day of transplant, there's quite a few. There's probably like 5 or 6. And so really at that point I was back. And so then I stayed in the ICU thing there for probably maybe a week, tops 5 days. And then they moved me up to my own room. And from there it became, okay, it became this series of sitting in bed all day, waiting to have Dilaudid if the pain started to set in. And if that happened, I'd be out. And then I'd wake up and I'd eat. And I'd do the shower routine, which was a major event because I had to go in there and walk I couldn't face the water. I had to have the water only hit the back of my head. But as miserable as it might sound, I was loving every moment of it. And everything was going great until we left the hospital. So my mother had come there and she was there. And so she and they checked us into a hotel. I was at the Pittsburgh VA Medical Center. That's where all this is taking place, right? The University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is immediately adjacent to it. And that's where my doctor, John Cacciarelli, was the chief transplant surgeon, one of the best in the United States. Anyway, so we moved in there and then things started to go a little sideways. Then it wasn't as easy for the pain relief. I'd already been past the part of This Is How It Feels to Heal, because that's the book I wrote about this. I had given up on pain years before that when it was, going through the medical procedures leading up to this. But it was hard. And so why did they? Oh, I didn't mention taste. Actually, I probably did. Anyway, there's another particularly bad moment prior to transplant. I might get back to that another time. I don't want to sound too doom and gloom here. As far as the pain goes, that was rough. And plus it just went on and on and on. And so my mom and I sat in this hotel for like 3 weeks, going over to the VA, like I think every other day. And then every Friday, we go for like tests on Tuesday and then back for meet with the staff on Friday. But then a couple times we went back just for a reason. And the rest of the time it was a snowstorm outside. And so we were out there walking along, trying to walk without falling down. I had these fresh stitches in me. And so my mom and I were there and we ended up watching the entire House of Cards series all the way up to as far as it went during that time, at that stay. But a couple of interesting things that took place. At first, I started getting these really, really bad migraine headaches. And I say migraine because I had those when I was a kid and they went away. I used to take this special medication. It was called Cafergot. I'd have to lay in the dark because my eyes would dilate and all this. And I'd have to lay in the dark for like several hours until it went away when I was like in grade school. And so I could tell because it was the same kind of feeling as that. And so what they did is they couldn't figure it out. They figured it had something to do with my spine because I do have a little scoliosis, a little bend in my back. And so get this. I know this all sounds unbelievable. In fact, our whole freaking story does. But I went over to the, this has a funny part too. I went back to the VA and they said, we're going to have to go and look at your spine. And I was like, what? And they said, yeah, we need to do whatever it's called. And I said, is that called a spinal tap? And they say, yes, that's a spinal tap. And so I said, okay, fine. Let's go ahead and pile that on there too. I mean, at this point, the more the merrier. I've already passed the hard part. Let's do a spinal tap. So I went into this room, the hospital with this guy, younger guy. He's like 25 years old or something. Nice guy, big, tall, in shape, and, we get to talking, and I told him that I used to be at UGAsports.com, and I'm from Athens, Georgia, a big Bulldog fan. And it turns out this kid's from Georgia, and he goes, I'm a Tech fan. I was like, and for those that don't know, Georgia and Georgia Tech are like the arch rivals. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I have a Tech fan now. I hope he's sane. He's not going to be one of these Southern college, like, okay, I'm going to get my revenge on this dog fan. But he didn't. It was very nice. And so I did the spinal tap, and then they didn't, something went wrong. And so after about 20 minutes, they came back in and told me they needed to do it again. So I did it. And both times, of course, no anesthesia, which was the running thing for a couple of these things. I had a few of these things without any anesthesia. And so I laid there second time and had a second spinal tap done. And yeah, it hurt, but come on. And again, I'd been through so much as far as those kind of things go. Heck, it had just been chopped open, although I don't really remember it. I will talk more about going into transplant in another story. That one's an interesting one too, literally the last moments going in. But anyway, so after the spinal tap, everything, they didn't find anything. They never did figure it out, but the headaches went away. So then it came time for me to go home. And of course, I had to go down and get my huge pile of all my meds, and in those days, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there was everything from steroids to, I mean, I can't even remember there's like 2 different kinds of steroids and all kinds of other stuff that they're no longer in my medicine kit, you could say. But the main ones were there. They're still there now, and I'll talk about that at the very end. But then I went home. And I went home by myself. I flew home by myself back to Georgia, and my son picked me up at the airport and took me home. And I lived alone, so he dropped me off at the house. And then so for the next few months, every day, I had to take off all my bandages and clean them. And then I'd have to get in the shower, and only the back. I couldn't get my stitches, all that wet. And so I had to change the band and then wrap the bandages back up, put all this stuff on them and everything. So I had to change my bandages each day. And that was weird, feeling like when you're in the shower and you rub your hands down your chest and all of a sudden you forget that you're about to hit rivets. It's just weird. They're not supposed to be there. And so, but they are. At any rate, I didn't have any problems throughout this time at all. And I was just on fire cognitively. I later found out, I'll talk more about this in another episode when I talk about my personal fasting that I do these days. But what had happened was that my mind was so clear, and I had been basically vegan/vegetarian for a while, / only eating a little meat here and there. And even then being things like very pure stuff like buffalo or like sea bass, things like that. Never a fast food, never in this entire period did I ever have any of those things. And, no junk foods, no alcohol, obviously, no really anything, no smoking. And so I was physically very in great shape to have a brand new liver and everything else. They took my gallbladder out, by the way. I didn't mention that, but I also don't have a gallbladder now. But I was on fire. And I went home and I started posting on Facebook, and it went crazy. I mean, I got maxed out at like 5,000 followers and all this. And then once that sort of era, because I'd gotten some of those when I was sick, I did notice in hindsight, though, that once I was no longer sick, that dropped off. You're only interesting when you're dying. When you live through it, you're no longer interesting, because that's, I think, I don't know. I think in hindsight, I think that a lot of people like to hear of the struggle. They don't like to hear the success, because unless they see the success, there's no connection there, which is weird, because I noticed that we'll read 2 things. Really, a side note, when I was diagnosed terminal, I left my career of people that I hired to worked all around me. All of them were staffers that came into the establishment that I created, my business. And then tons of all kinds of people from that whole sports world and everything. But I really can't remember more than maybe, I can't remember really at all that really had any contact with me once they found out I had cancer, or that I was liver failure, or whatever had happened. They didn't know, but I was gone. And again, once you're out there and you're winning, they're on your team. But I mean, I think in that instance, I don't think it was like that. I think people I was a dead man walking. And that was like that for like the entire community of Athens. I mean, I fell out. I didn't know really anybody by the time it was done because I mean, I was a dead guy. Nobody, what are you going to do? So I think there's a little bit of that. But then in the dead guy came a lot of sympathy, I think, from people. Oh, look at this guy. He's got all these things. And I'm not trying to make fun of them at all, but you can see what I'm saying. But then once I got past it, and once I said, like I'd been dreaming, I'm going to move to Iceland as soon as I live through this. And then, of course, COVID was there and I couldn't, but I bailed anyway. And I've been living out of the United States since for 5 years now. Um, that doesn't count because now you went from the dying guy to the guy that survived it to the guy that broke out of the system that's working remotely, which I had already been since 97, but still now it was a thing because everybody was digital. The rise of the digital nomad really took off then and all this. But then I became, that's different. I've noticed in the way that people view you deals on your personal situation. And I'm not saying that, it's interesting because I'm talking to people right now. You and I are having this conversation, though I'm the only one speaking. It's just the nature of people, I guess. I don't know what you find interesting. And in fact, if you're listening to this and you don't have a liver transplant, I hope you find this interesting. But at any rate, so to wrap this up on since transplant, then that first, like initial period, the only thing that did take place is you'll recall Troy, my brother, we had 2 different times we've talked about his episode that he had with a drug called gabapentin. I have peripheral neuropathy pretty severely as a result of about 25 years of having hepatitis C. It fried my nerves. And so what's basically happening is that the longer the nerve is, towards the end of it, they're slowly dying off. And so, like, for instance, the tips of my toes are numb. And I get massive, massive foot, leg. And the closer it gets to my feet, the worse the cramps get, except for the interior thighs, which are I call those the jump out of the window. It hurts so bad pain. And it does. There's been times when it's like, gee whiz, to get I know I've got to suffer through this for another 30 minutes or, because there's nothing you can do once it hits. But I have peripheral neuropathy. And what helps greatly with that is my daily gabapentin, my 1-300 that I take each day, not 1,200 like Troy's doctor had him on that had him a little loopy. But I started to notice early on that I was feeling a little loopy because in those days I was supposed to take it 3 times a day, 3 times 300, 900. And I noticed I was getting loopy and I cut back on it. But I had also gone on the road and now I'm in Latin America. And I'm looking at my drugs. I'm having to repack them because of, different containers. And what had happened is I have this other drug called ursodiol, I believe is how it's said, something like that. And it's to keep the bile in my liver loose so that because instead, like in a normal person, if you have a healthy liver, your bile, your liver makes a bile, it puts it into your gallbladder. And then when you eat, it squirts it into your stomach. It's ready to go. It's all there and it helps with digestion. Problem is, if you don't have that little reservoir, the bile duct, the gallbladder in between, the bile has nowhere to go, so it stays in the liver, or it's a slow leak into the gut, which you don't really want. So you want to keep it in there as much as possible, but then it can pool and it can turn into like a kidney stone. You now have gallstones. And so the 2 pills look identical. They're both white and they're both in capsules and there's nothing really written on them. Okay. And so I had thought I was stopping the gabapentin, but I actually was not taking the 3 times a day that I must take ursodiol to keep that bile. And so in May of 2020, 15 months afterwards, all of a sudden, boom, I got these pains and they were like, what in the heck is this? And it was just, horrible, horrible pains. And I was on a road trip. I had taken a road trip of all things during the summer of 2020 while the pandemic's going on. A friend of mine had driven from Athens all the way up to Georgia, all the way up to Maine. And while in Maine, it struck bad. And I wound up in an ER in Massachusetts. And they called the VA and the VA said, go home and get up here as fast as possible. So I did that, and they put me on an ultrasound thing or something and blew up, and it turns out it was gallstones that was doing it because I'd stopped taking the ursodiol thinking I had stopped taking the other one. So you can imagine that was time for Steve to buckle down on making sure that he hit the right order. There's one that I do not forget. I would forget any other drug on there. Not that I do. I very rarely miss a day. I do them in the morning and evening. Very rarely do I miss a morning or a evening. Maybe once every few months. It's rare. I'm very good at taking my medications. But that one, I actually carry with me. If I'm out and it's 1 o'clock, I'm taking it because I've taken it in the morning. I do not ever want to go through that experience again. And I also know that it would be horrible for me out here in the world because I would literally have to get in an airplane, find my way back to Pittsburgh, get it done, stay in a hotel, get all the way back down to Columbia. And so, don't want to be doing that. So anyway, that was really the only thing that went wrong, and that was me. That was nothing else than me screwing up my meds. And but since then, everything continues to be going great. I do not get enough of my medical attention that I probably should be getting. I basically get blood usually twice a year. There's been a couple times where I think it's always been twice, maybe sometimes three. And it's only when I'm back in the States. I will here shortly when I go to Chicago at Christmas time. I'll go to the VA and they'll take my blood. And then usually in the summer times, I go back to Athens and I do it there at my regular VA in Athens. But all of my tests have come back fine. They have not changed my prescription in any way since the time I left in September 2020. I left in September 2020. The last time they updated my meds, it's exactly the same now. I take a 0.5 milligram of tacrolimus in the morning and the evening. That's an immunosuppressant. I take a 500 milligram of mycophenolate. That is also immunosuppressant in the morning and the evening. Their other names, by the way, for tacrolimus is Corgraph, and the other name for mycophenolate is Silseth. Those are, I think, generic names. One of them is pretty accurate. Then I take the ursodiol for my bile, and then I take, of course, magnesium. I'm supposed to take. The thing is, there's really no number I'm supposed to take on there. We just sort of had to figure out what the VA had in mind because they were giving me really crappy magnesium oxide, which has a horrible absorption rate. It's like 10%. And they were having me take 5,000 milligrams a day. And of course, all that did was make me have to go to the bathroom constantly. It's like basically taking a laxative constantly. So I had to do some research. And so I have I'll have to give you the exact name. It's a bisigilate or something like that. Chelate. It's got a really fancy name, magnesium, that's expensive, but I only have to take about 2 of them a day, and they're only 200 milligrams. And so I've got like 5 bottles of those that I ordered from a health store in the United States. And so that really helps there. Then I take the 1 gabapentin, 300 milligrams, usually in the morning. And that is just and sometimes if I don't take it in the morning, because sometimes I don't want to overload my stomach too early, depending on if I've eaten, I'll take it at some point, maybe before I go to bed, because all that's going to do is help out with if any of the neuropathy gets through. I don't necessarily need it in most cases. If I stay hydrated and take my magnesium, I probably won't need it, but it definitely puts the sugar on top, or whatever, the icing on the cake, to make sure that you're cool in that regard. But even then, each night I do have about a 6-hour window before I do have to wake up because of foot cramps, because by that time my magnesium slips below, and it's almost impossible to keep myself hydrated that long at the level it must be hydrated, or something along those lines. But that's my alarm clock every day. It's going to sound terrible, but it basically feels like somebody hits you in the legs with a baseball bat until you wake up. So very little need for coffee after that. But so anyway, so to round out the rest of the meds, I take the tacrolimus, the mycophenolate, the ursodiol, the gabapentin, magnesium, and then I have, in addition to that, I also have another Ducacet, I think it is. It's something that helps. It's like a laxative every once in a while if I need that, which I don't even know if I ever have needed it, but I have it just in case. And then I have another one it's a form of like an antacid type thing that I take in the mornings when I do my bigger load of meds, because I also take in the morning Iberstan or something like that. It's a blood pressure medication. And so I take it in the mornings, 300 milligrams is Iberstan or something like that. It's actually, I think it's in Spanish because what it is on the box. So I don't know what the U.S. name is. But anyway, 300 milligrams of that, and that keeps my blood pressure down. But in addition to that, real fast, I will say I also do a lot of intermittent fast. I do not intermittent fasting. I do extended fasts fairly regularly. I've done about 9 since the beginning of August when I started this latest round, and they're 72 hours apiece. And then in between that, I largely eat keto. There are days that I don't eat keto, and I allow myself to go completely hog wild. Like if I want to go eat pizza and hot dogs, I'll eat pizza and hot dogs. But then I get back on the regular routine, and each day I have a pretty good workout regimen that I do almost every single day. And I use creatine. and I use a whole host of other supplements that go along with liver support and things like that, but I'm not going to mention them in this conversation. I shouldn't have mentioned creatine right there because they have nothing to do with liver transplant. They have to do with the, just my lifestyle in general. Though I will say, fasting and liver transplant, the part of your body that gets the most out of a fast is your liver. It is on cloud nine. Once you get all that fat and sugars and everything else burned out, the wrong kind of stuff. Now, I shouldn't have said fat there. Once you get the garbage burned out of your system after your metabolism gets going about 12 to 18 hours in there, you start running on those ketones, man, your liver is in hog heaven all through that period. So I'm not giving advice on that. I will talk, though, about this topic in another video, but I just wanted to follow up by saying that where I end the story, basically in September of 2020, I'm at that exact same place today. There's been no change whatsoever in my medication or the way that I feel, and I've only gotten healthier. When I got out of the hospital, I had $300, and I hadn't had more than 20 grams of protein per day in almost 9 years. I had a lot of rebuilding to do. And so no matter how bad your situation is, if you do have liver disease and you're facing transplant, just know that it is possible to get through that no matter how many things they pile on you. Cancer, liver, failure, the blood pressure, the neuropathy, the hepatitis C, and then all the rest that I said afterwards, the things you have to go through. Trust the doctors, trust yourself, and trust in whatever you find is a higher power, because that's going to help you a lot. I know it helped me quite a bit. In fact, I don't know, without either one of those three, it would not have happened. And they all equally matter because they all equally are there. And so with that, folks, I will leave you, and I will be back later today with my brother Troy and I, who will talk a little bit about other things. But I did see that there was a lot of action on that part one of me talking about my transplant. And so I figured I'd do the post-transplant. And I did leave a lot out, and there was plenty of conversation to come. But what I'd like to do is find out if there's any questions that y'all have about this. Is anybody out there facing liver transplant, back from liver transplant, questions about it in general? Any of the things that I talked about, spinal tap, getting taste, chemotherapy, all those kind of things. Just comment below. We will reach out. And I've seen some comments down there, and I've replied to a couple, but I want to make sure that after we've only been doing this for what is it today? It's 21 days. 21 days this site's been going. This channel's been going. And so we'll come back to that. I think at the end of the month, we'll probably go back and look at the comments and have a day like that. But that requires people say something. So if you like this kind of comment, if you like what we're doing here, it's very unscripted. We're planning on going live because remember, at our hearts, we're freaking originally heavy metal people. Then I sort of morphed into a Grateful Dead guy. And now I'm kind of both, but all about live performance, and we always talk about that. We don't like studio music. We don't like canned electronica. We like live bands. And so if we're going to talk like that, we need to do it like that. So we can't be recording our stuff. We have to go live. So we'll be back live in a little bit with my brother. Until then, like, comment, subscribe, reach out. It really helps us a lot if you do that. We don't know where this is going. We don't know really where we've been. And I think as Gen X, we all share that. After all we've been through, now what? And so my brother and I are heading into our 60th year next year. I just turned 59 4 days ago, 5 days ago. No, 2 days ago. My brain's already gone. See, old age. Give me my cane. Talk to you later, folks. Stay in touch. Man, I think it's stopping. Leave. Apparently.